Meanwhile, China has also criticized Donald Trump's first national security strategy, urging Washington to stop, quote, Cold War mentality.
It's not surprising for the two powers to have differences, but the two should take constructive measures to appropriately handle them on the basis of respecting each other's core interests and major concerns. We urge the U.S. side to stop intentionally distorting China's strategic intentions and to abandon outdated ideas of Cold War mentality and zero-sum game. Otherwise, it will only harm others and itself.
Well, China, however, stressed that the cooperation between Washington and Beijing will lead to a win-win outcome. Russia has also rejected Trump's claim that Moscow poses a threat to the U.S. The Kremlin says the strategy has an imperialist nature and shows the lack of willingness to give up on unilateralism. In a speech on Monday, Trump claimed that Russia and China seek to challenge, quote, America's influence and values. Joining us via Skype from Ontario is Jason Unruhe. He's a political commentator. Many thanks for joining us here on PressTV, Mr. Unruhe. Now, listening to China, Iran, and Russia as far as the response goes to Trump's national security strategy, all three have outlined how this strategy and this mentality is outdated. It doesn't factor in the new realities on the ground.
No, it certainly does not. The United States is used to being a sole hegemonic power since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They're used to just having their way with absolutely everyone anytime they want. But the geopolitical world is quite different from that time. Now we have states like China, which are now superpowers, and Russia, which are rising on the global scale, and Iran, which has been a stalwart opponent of U.S. imperialism and its influence in the region. The U.S. is still of the mentality that it can do whatever it wants without taking any diplomatic considerations into account. Such acts are frankly irresponsible. Doing things like this without regard for the consequences, or perhaps even believing that there are no consequences, can only lead to greater hostilities, and these hostilities would lead to perhaps even greater instability in the world economy, the global security, etc. What the United States is doing is very much an outdated idea that just seeks to place itself on a pedestal as the highest and greatest power, assuming that there is no one else of any relevance in the world.
Well, more than just that, Mr. Unruhe, it's also when the U.S. sees other powers like China or even Russia, even Iran's influence in the Middle East, it looks at it as a threat, as though the U.S. is fighting against these rogue regimes, as Trump has described them, and terrorism and competition by belligerent governments, as opposed to trying to work together.
Yes, that's very much stock in trade for the United States. They don't care very much for the rights of other countries around the world. They're very much acting in an aggressive manner. They feel that the world is theirs for the taking, and that the political rights of other countries don't matter. This is it's not just an outdated idea. It's frankly a bad idea. No consideration is being made for others, and they're struggling to have their voices heard in the world. They do wield influence just as many people do in the world, and they're just being treated as though they don't matter by the United States. It's not just a dangerous game that the United States is playing. It's also a very insulting one. It's insulting to the dignity of many countries.
And how much of this is Trump's strategy, though? Because a lot of this criticism has also been leveled against the Obama administration's foreign policy and presidents before him.
Well, I think this is very much Donald Trump. In the previous administration of Obama, there was still the somewhat the similar mentality, but he was very diplomatic about it. He was able to give a much more reasoned and nuanced kind of flavor to it, as though he was really taking into consideration coming off as a real statesman, whereas Donald Trump cuts all pretenses of any kind of diplomacy whatsoever and merely acts in the very bull in a china shop kind of way. He will do what he wants the way he wants, and the consequences for acting that way don't really matter. That would be the main difference between the two, the way that Obama presented himself and the way that Donald Trump presents himself.
Interesting times. That's Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us live from Ontario. Mr. Unruhe, as always, thank you very much for your comments here on Press TV.